been the center of the Catholic Church. It has never left Rome. It split between Rome and Avignon at one point, called the Great Schism, but it never left Rome. And he wants to reinvigorate Rome, make it glorious again. In fact, he saw himself as the Christian Caesar. And he commissioned lots of artwork. So I'm going to show you this one first because it's from Michelangelo. But the first thing he commissioned Michelangelo was to create his own tomb, kind of like the pharaohs. He wants to create his own tomb before he dies to represent his magnificence. The original design was this three-storied, three-dimensional architectural form, which would have had 40 over life-size statues on it, all carved by Michelangelo. It was his dream commission. But I'll just give you a little heads up here. David took Michelangelo 4 years to sculpt. Over life size. If that's roughly how long it takes you to create that big a statue, how long would it take Michelangelo to create something with 40 statues? 160 years? Not happening. So it gets whittled down to what we see today. It's a little church near the Colosseum called San Pietro in Vincoli, St. Peter in chains. And this is what's left of Michelangelo's magnificent design for the Julius tomb. And you can see there are some famous statues here. The dying slave and the rebellious slave, they were supposed to be on. If you look at the previous image, the slaves are down on the bottom here. And the most famous statue of all is Moses. He was supposed to be kind of a secondary statue up on the second floor. But today he's the most famous statue from the whole project. And of course, Pope Julius commissioned the Sistine ceiling for Michelangelo. And also another Pope, Pope Paul III, commissioned the Last Judgment, both in the Sistine Chapel. So magnificence is reflecting the empire of the Pope, of the papacy. And then also Raphael was commissioned to decorate the papal apartments between 1510 and 1511. Again, reflecting Pope Julius's power over the Catholic world. And this is a similar example to the New Athens in Rome. That's why it's called the School of Athens. It's all the great philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, etc., that were in ancient Greece that went over the course of about 300 years. So he brought them all together in one image, Raphael, called the School of Athens. In the Baroque period, the 17th century, the Pope expanded the look of empire in Rome and had Bernini design this gigantic colonnade. And if you want to see the scale difference between the Vatican itself and the Sistine ceiling, Sistine Chapel, the Sistine Chapel is this little tiny thing right here. So it's gigantic, St. Peter's. So they get more and more, they have more and more delusions of grandeur, the popes, as time goes on, and they have more money and they have more reason to show that they're powerful because they're getting more and more paranoid. Because of the Reformation, they're losing power. Just a couple of things commissioned from Bernini by the Pope. This is called the Four Rivers Fountain, representing the Pope's or the Vatican's hold on the Catholic world in South America, in Egypt, in Europe, all over the place in Asia. And this little thing here, if you've seen Angels and Demons, this is inside St. Peter's. It's over the grave of St. Peter. And you probably didn't pay attention, but it's huge. It looks pretty small here, but it's 6 stories high inside the nave of St. Peter's. It's called the baldacchino, means the canopy. So right there is where the Camerlenga went down and burned himself to death. The guy in Angels and Demons that had the antimatter. Oh. The Spanish Empire, same period, the Baroque period. Philip IV went and conquered Northern Europe and Southern Italy and incorporated into the Spanish Empire. And he commissioned or was the king to patron of a man named Diego Velázquez, one of our greatest artists of the 17th century. And this is a portrait by Velázquez of the king. And this is one of the paintings of victory over Flanders that was commissioned by Velázquez to commemorate Spain's expansion into the rest of Europe. The British Empire is interesting. Britain as a culture has been around for 3,000 years. But until we have a consolidation of power within dynasties, within families, we don't really have what we call a cohesive empire. But once we do, we have King Henry VIII, who is considered the king of England, Ireland, and France, therefore an emperor, and his daughter, Queen Elizabeth I. Both of them are the two most famous and most powerful leaders of England in English history. Not too good looking, but very powerful. A century or more later, King Charles I oversteps the bounds of an emperor or a king. And he is so greedy, and he is so paranoid, he is so selfish, he decides to dissolve Parliament. What would happen if our president, whoever he was, dissolved Congress?
Oh, God.
Civil unrest.
Yeah, more than unrest, that's being euphemistic. People would go insane. Because who would they have to blame for all the crap that's going on in America, right? They blame Congress. Usually it is Congress. But they wouldn't have anyone to blame. Our system of government would fall apart if we didn't have Congress. But he did that. No, not him. Him. He did that. He dissolved Parliament. And he kept taking more and more power. And he kept consolidating more and more power. And he kept expanding his reach in England. Until one day, there was an English Civil War. And it was all because of Charles I.
I wonder why.
And a man named Oliver Cromwell took over the reins of leadership, had him arrested, tried, and executed for trying to take away the democratic form of government from the English people. So sometimes emperors reach a bit too far. George III. Who's heard of George III? Who is he?
There's a rich one, there was a really rich one that,
Well, they're all really rich ones.
I mean, like, he was the one with all the libertarian clothes and he was the
Okay,
one-
that's a minor part of it. That's his outward manifestation. I'll give you a hint. July 4th, 1776. He's who we rebelled against. George III of England. Oh, that George. So this is his coronation painting. He's very humble, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Emperors are always humble, aren't they?
I like his sense of style.
George loved art, though. That's one saving grace for George. There was an American artist named Benjamin West that came from the colonies. In other words, he was an English citizen in the colonies. He came to England in the 1760s. Became so popular with the king that the king actually considered him his favorite painter. It's interesting for an American to be the English king's favorite painter, right? Because he's doing his best to put down anything happening in America that wants freedom and independence. This is a painting that establishes a new style called neoclassicism, where you take classical forms and use them to tell a story in order to teach a lesson, a moral or political lesson. And Benjamin West actually invented this form of painting. It becomes very popular later on. And this painting is an historical painting. General James Wolfe was in charge of the British forces in America during the French and Indian War. And at one of the battles, he was mortally wounded. England was mortally wounded. He was mortally wounded. He died in battle, in other words. And he became a national hero because he represented English policy, English principles, English respect in the world. And he was killed by a bunch of upstart Indians and Frenchies we didn't like. That's what the English thought. French and Indians, James Wolfe, he's a hero. So George III commissioned a painting, a competition, to create an image that shows the death of General Wolfe. And Benjamin West painted it again. And this became George III's favorite painting. Little problem was that West was American, and he was teaching George a lesson. He said, if you overstep your boundaries as a ruler and try to subdue a people that wants freedom, what's going to happen to you? You're going to end up dead. The revolution didn't kill him, but it pretty much ended his hold on the power of his empire. It started waning after he died. Another American artist under the auspices of George III painted a painting of a man who struggled with American independence. His name was the Earl of Chatham. And after a session where he was vehemently trying to defend English policy in the House of Lords, he died of a heart attack during his speech. And another national hero. And that's why Copley was commissioned to paint this painting for George III. George III's son didn't fare so well. He was called the Prince Regent until his father, I don't know if anyone saw the movie called The Madness of King George. But King George suffered from some mental illness. They think from some chemical imbalance, but for years he was totally whacked. He'd run outside the palace in the middle of the night